You're watching the PoliticIt Podcast.
Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt Podcast. We're here with Jill Koford today, District 10, House of Representatives. Nice to have you.
Thank you, John. I'm still getting used to that title.
Yeah, it is.
So great to be here.
It's kind of interesting. Tight race. You came out on top.
Tight race, came out on top. Just survived my first legislative session, which was a great learning experience and wonderful opportunity.
Well, and you did so well with the bills that you got passed. Let's talk about those.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, it's interesting. I think sometimes we pass bills that don't get a lot of attention, but make big changes for people who they impact. One of those was helping to get epinephrine in all of our schools in different forms. There's a new delivery system for epinephrine, and there are parents who have children that have allergic reactions that need to make sure that all of those delivery mechanisms are available.
So tell us a little bit more detail about that.
So it's really interesting. Right now, usually epinephrine is delivered with an auto-injector.
Right, the EpiPen.
The EpiPen, right? And some staff members, they don't like needles. They don't want to give a kid a shot. And time is of the essence in that situation. There's a new FDA-approved delivery mechanism. It's called Neffy. It's a nasal spray. And so what we did was just clarify the code. It allows children and their parents, mainly, if their parents have a prescription for their child for Neffy, it can be administered in school. There's a little bit of ambiguity, and as it gets more widely used, we're hoping to see it get in the
So where did that idea come from? What's your background that makes that something that you were interested in doing?
Well, it's interesting. My husband and I actually started a business. We worked in the fertility space for many, many years. And so I know enough about medications and FDA approvals to be dangerous, but it's something that I know and understand. And I actually have a good friend that works in HHS, and she came to me and said, "Will you run this bill? We need some help getting this into schools." So it was, like I said, one of those small changes that really has a big impact. One of the greatest things, I was sitting in my first committee hearing presenting this bill, and I was caught completely off guard because a mom came up and sat down and was really quite emotional and said, "Please pass this bill. This impacts my child, my family, and we need this." And I mean, isn't that the reason we're all serving, right?
Yeah.
Those are the paydays.
And that was not somebody you knew beforehand?
It was not planned. I had no idea I would have someone speaking there. I knew, we talked to the school nurses. We knew that they were very much in favor of it. I talked to DHHS. We knew they were very much in favor of it. So to have somebody just show up to speak in favor of the bill was really gratifying. It was a humbling moment.
That's cool. Yeah, so I was kind of curious where that idea came from, but it's funny sometimes how our legislation comes about, right? Sometimes it's a constituent locally that has a difficulty. Sometimes it's just something that we've been passionate about for a while and felt like we really needed to push that forward.
And I think we all have some of those passion projects, right? I mean, one thing that I know all of us hear about is property taxes. Right.
And that's something you've been very concerned about, I know.
Very concerned about. I hear it every time I knock on a door. Every time you talk to a constituent, they're concerned about how much their property taxes have gone up. And it's tricky. As a state, we don't set those local budgets, right? That's a product of our local governments. But the question is, what can we do as the state to lead out on that? How can we lean into that, encourage our cities and municipalities to be responsive, and find ways to cut back on property taxes? And there were a couple of bills this session that looked at property taxes, and I had one of those.
So let's talk about yours.
Okay. So I actually had two bills. One we put a pause on because it requires a constitutional amendment, and that's whether or not we change the percentage that we give as a discount on what you pay on your fair market value on your house. And one of the challenges with property taxes is they're confusing. And it's difficult to explain how it all works, but you're not taxed on the full value of your house. You're taxed currently at 45% of that value. So we were evaluating whether or not we wanted to take that up to 50% to try to balance out some of the buckets of where property taxes are going. A lot of our businesses have seen a devaluation in their business properties, and we've seen a huge escalation in how primary homes are valued. And so that makes those buckets uneven. We put a pause on that because it does take a constitutional amendment, and I want to study it through the interim to make sure that we're getting it right, if that's the right move. The second part of that looked at the state minimum rate. and how that's set. And what we decided is that if we had more people at the table, more transparency, more conversation, more accountability in how that state minimum rate was set, that maybe we could push back and lower that rate and give some relief to property owners. So that's the bill that passed.
Okay, and so what does it do exactly?
What it does is that instead of just the tax commission setting that rate, it brings in the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget and the Legislative Fiscal Analyst Office to look at where we are budgetarily. Property taxes have to collect a certain dollar revenue. It's revenue neutral, right? So the question is, are we over collecting? Can we lower the rate and still hit that revenue number? And that's the hope, that we bring in more minds, more budgetary processes, and look for ways to push back on that rate and lower it.
Yeah. So if the money comes in,
let's stop there.
They like to spend it, don't they?
Right. Well, government is greedy, right? So one of the ways we encourage government to cut back is to cut the revenue, right? Cut the taxes. So
what were some of the other bills that you were interested in along these lines in taxation and stuff?
Well, I think as a whole, there was some really great policy passed. And while I didn't sponsor those bills, the legislature itself, we raised the threshold for Social Security income. Right now, if you make $90,000 or less, you don't pay on your income as a retired senior. And
it was 75, right?
Right.
So we've gone up to 90.
Yeah, we've gone up to 90. I think that's important. I'd love to see that go to 100%. And I think that's the right policy move. This is a step in the right direction. In a year where budgets were flat, I think doing it incrementally is wise policy. So, and then of course the income tax cut, right?
Right.
I mean, I remember a few years ago, if you'd have said that Utah was going to be at a 4.5% income tax rate, the sky would be falling. But we're doing really well, and we were able to bring it down to that 4.5%.
Yeah. So hopefully that continues, right?
I think that there are a lot of people that would like to see that continue to go down, right? And with what's happening across the nation right now, you see, 2 states looking at getting rid of their income taxes altogether. What does that look like in Utah, and should that be evaluated?
There was another important property tax bill too that basically freezes the base rate, right?
Right. Representative Auxier found that we had a rate that was just automatically increasing every year, and that it was going through without truth in taxation. I think she called it a shadow tax because there was really nobody reporting on that or being held accountable for that. So for that to freeze, that was really good policy. I was very supportive of that.
Well, we're going to take a break and we'll come right back.
Tired of media bias? Frustrated by political noise? PoliticIt.com cuts through the clutter, giving you real facts, clear analysis, and unbiased insight on the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay empowered. Whether it's elections, policy changes, or breaking news, we've got you covered. No spin, no agendas, just truth you can trust. Visit PoliticIt.com today, because informed citizens shape the future. PoliticIt.com, where politics meets clarity.
Welcome back to PoliticIt. We're here with Jill Koford. So nice to have you. During the break, I forgot to ask you some personal things about you, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I found interesting was your dad was a firefighter.
He was. He was a firefighter for Ogden City for 30 years. And then when he wasn't a firefighter, he was busy installing sprinkling systems. He was one of the hardest working men I know, is my dad. But I have great memories of just the old fire station isn't there anymore. We'd walk, we could tap on the pole and yell, and he'd come down on the pole and then take us up and come down on the pole with my dad and sit in the fire truck.
And that was right over here, across
behind the municipal building.
Yeah.
When Station 1 was torn down, that was a sad day in my life, because we spent a lot of time there.
Yeah. And so there was an important bill this year. I know when the governor was signing it, you were there, and that was special to you, wasn't it?
It was very special. When you talk to our firefighters, and where they rush into situations where we would all rush away, right, with no thought about themselves. And so many of our firefighters are being hit hard with certain types of cancer that they can relate right back to their jobs, right? So Casey Snyder's bill was really important. It puts into place some of those preventative measures, preventative screenings for our firefighters. And our current fire chief, he actually worked with my dad, the Ogden City Fire Chief.
Oh, he did.
So there's that connection that you're all kind of part of a family, right? Firefighters are a special breed of people. And so to be able to stand in that room shoulder to shoulder with our firefighters and see the impact that legislation will have on them, again, it's kind of why we do this thing, is to look for those things that we can solve and help improve people's lives.
You're kind of getting this reputation too of being the Great Salt Lake Lady or something, right?
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard that. Yeah, actually, and in my district, where all of us are in Ogden, that dust
Right.
off the Great Salt Lake, it hits us. We see that. We see it roll in off the West Desert. We know it's important to our ecosystem, that lake. We've got to make sure that we're getting water there and that it makes sense the way that we're doing it. Water, we live in a desert, and I think that we need to realize that. And I did get to run the Great Salt Lake bill this year. That, again, was another way to bring more transparency. The Great Salt Lake Commissioner and the Department of Ag now need to work a little more in concert together. It gives them some flexibility in getting water to the lake.
So what exactly does that bill do then?
So it does that. It brings greater coordination between the Department of Ag and the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. It clarifies some of the ways we extract minerals from the lake, which is really important because that impacts the water in the lake. And then it allows for some study of the habitat around the lake to make sure that we're protecting that really important habitat. So
That's good.
All things that I think we can all agree on. If we lose that lake, we lose the Intermountain West, really. So it's an important piece of who and what we are in Utah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how that lake affects the amount of snow we get, which then affects how much water we have, right? And so we have to take care of that balance.
Yeah. And if that does stop that West Desert, there are some concerns about that for our health. And if that lake were to disappear, that would impact the entire Intermountain West. So that's an important space that I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to work in. In fact, I was in a meeting just before I got here today talking about water and the Great Salt Lake and kind of some new policies and what that will look like next year.
You've been able to, in a short period of time, I mean, this is your first session, really, right?
Yeah.
But it makes a difference that you're in the Republican majority and you've actually garnered a lot of influence within that majority, right?
I've been really grateful. It helps to have the Speaker of the House in Weber County, but certainly if you're not at the table where those decisions are made, then it's hard to get things done. And John, you know this more than anybody. You've been in the legislature for a few years. It's a miracle, one, that we pass anything, that you get 104 people on board to pass a bill, and a lot of that takes place because of the relationships and being in the room where the decisions are made. So I'm really grateful to have that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think as a new freshman, you actually had quite a bit of impact too.
Well, I appreciate that.
I think that's your personality. I think it's the way you interact with people. I think that you've been able to garner a lot of credibility.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Right?
Thank you.
And so, what was it like for you? Personally?
Well, this is the metaphor I use. It's like running with your hair on fire. You're getting hit in the face with a fire hose and you're pretty sure people are chasing you with a machete and you're not sure if you're going to outrun them, right? But in the middle of all of that, you're trying to make decisions based in the principles that you ran on, right? And for me, that's limited government, personal responsibility, and self-reliance. And those things really guide the decisions that I make, and those are rooted in our Constitution. And in the principles of the Republican Party. So every piece of policy that I evaluate, I try to evaluate it based on those things. And if we're stepping into places where we shouldn't as a government, then maybe the answer needs to be no.
So what was the most? What were some of the memories you had of the session? What are some things that kind of stand out in your mind?
What I probably loved the most was meeting with some of the school kids that came up on Capitol Hill and asking them to come and sit on the floor with me. I had one group come from St. Joe's Junior High, and they were so excited to be there. And when I said, hey, if you guys will go in the gallery, I'll make sure we have an opportunity to acknowledge you. And I got a text from their teacher just saying they felt so important And
so when they were up there,
they stood up, we clapped for them. I announced that I had a personal privilege on the floor and talked about some of their accomplishments. They were there celebrating. They had been working on a big project at school, and so it was fun to be able to highlight that. Meeting with the students, that's always going to be my favorite thing. Talking to them about the symbolism in the house and what we do and how the process works. I love that.
Yeah. So what were some of your committee assignments, and how did you play in those committees?
I served on natural resources, and I served
which plays in with your whole desire to help with the Great Salt Lake, right?
Yeah, we had a really controversial urban farming bill that came to our committee this year, which I have a group in my district called Eden Farms. They are doing really remarkable work. They are feeding the homeless. They are taking people that maybe need a hand up and putting them to work on their farm. And it's a small farm in an urban setting, and they're doing really, really remarkable things with them. So to be able to talk about that bill and to work through some of the tricky technicalities on it, that was really fun.
So you might be one of the few people on natural resources from Weber County.
The speaker's on there.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But one of the few. And to me it makes sense because that's where water and energy start. And if you want to talk about the arms race of our day, it's water and energy. And so to be on that committee where those foundational things are being talked about and planned for, that's really important, I think, to the entire state.
So what are some of the other committees?
The other committee I serve on my standing committee is revenue and taxation, which for somebody that wants to look at the budget, that wants to know that we're spending our tax dollars.
And that is an important committee to be assigned to when you're new.
I didn't know that,
yeah.
But I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be there and to dig into our tax policy. We need to do better. We need to make sure that we're being good stewards of our taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what about your appropriations committee?
Appropriations committee was general government. Probably a really quiet, sleepy appropriations committee. But that's really where a lot of our government agencies are being funded. And so to be able to look into some of those areas and see if we can find efficiencies there, I think is really important. So, and it was a great place for me to start to try to understand that.
How the budget works.
The budget works. It's so big.
Yeah.
Right? So I enjoyed kind of getting into those things, and that's actually led to some things that I'll be working on during interim.
So will you be on that committee? What committees in interim are you on?
So in interim, revenue and taxation and natural resources meet at the same time during the day.
Yeah.
So they've kept me on rev and tax, and I'll be on political subdivisions. That's my afternoon committee or morning committee. Yeah. So that will be a place where I know we'll be talking about housing. We'll be talking about zoning challenges and
all important things for Weber County.
All really important things for Weber County. Yeah. They're probably second only to property taxes is housing for people. Yeah. Well,
we're about out of time. Any parting thoughts?
No, thank you so much for the opportunity, John. You know, I love being able to serve the people in my district. I try to be very responsive and have the conversations, and sometimes they're hard conversations, but I'm always willing to listen.
Yeah, very good. Jill Koford, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys next week.